He's a sawing and jawing and doing his thing.
Hey Woodworkers, I'm your buddy Dave. Welcome back to the Saws and Jaws Workshop. This is part 5 of our 5-part Jig-a-palooza series on table saw jigs. And in this episode, wait for it, we're going to be boarding an unsupported and perilous flight off the end of our table saw, and we're looking for any kind of outfeed support solutions that will give this board and us a safe landing as we exit a long rip cut. Now I'm really excited to show you this, so let's put our seat backs and tray tables in their full upright and locked positions and fasten your seat belts because we're coming in hot on this one, baby. So do you think I have a career as a flight attendant? Nah, didn't think so. Not going to give up my day job. Let's get started. Hey Woodworkers, welcome back. We're talking table saw safe landings in this episode, and what we mean by that is pushing a long board through a rip cut off the end of the table saw onto some kind of platform that supports your workpiece. So you don't want that thing bobbling around after the blade has exited, and you don't want that thing hanging out in space. So you want some kind of support to it. So out in front of me here is what I've done. This is a solution I've come up with that works for me, is I've got a little outfeed support table, and that gives me foolproof, goof-proof, and duh-proof support of my workpiece as I exit that blade. And I'm all about the duh, as you know, and I want you to learn from my mistakes. So this was a big one, not having any kind of outfeed support. So I know what you're saying, Dave, isn't there another way to do that? Of course there is. You can build a simple T-jig, clamp that to a sawhorse, or you can put that into a Black & Decker Workmate or a knockoff type of thing. We've got a couple pictures here. Barry's going to slide them in there and show you. There you go. But again, what I've opted to do was to build an outfeed table. I needed it to be fairly mobile. I've got a small shop. I move my tools around a lot, and it needs to be flexible. It needs to support not just the table saw, but a couple other power tools. So it gives me some great outfeed support. Very easy to build. I've got about 36 inches long by 20 inches wide. That's 1/2 inch Baltic birch plywood. Beautiful stuff, flat and stable. The underside of that is just a couple of plywood trusses with some plywood sandwiched in between. It's just making again, this is just a big T-jig, folks, and this thing clamps into a Rockwell jaw stand. So Barry's going to fly in another image of the jig kind of taken apart so you can kind of see what I mean. Fly that in, guy. Thanks, Barry. So you can see that the underside of the jig fits into the jaw stand, and it gets clamped in there very tightly. And the beautiful thing about the jaw stand is I can coarsely adjust it to about the approximate height of the end of the table saw. It's then got a crank. This model has a crank that lets me bring it up, fine adjust it, and then finally it's got a tilting head that's pretty cool. I can match the angle of my table saw. I've got a little bit of a downward cant to my table saw due to my roller stand that it's sitting in. And so I can level it up and line it up perfectly. So we'll see that in just a second. So why would we want outfeed support? I'm glad you asked me that question. Take a look at this board I have here. What I've got labeled on here is the tipping point. This is the point at which your board is perfectly balanced on your table saw like that, but beyond that point, gravity wants to take this thing and pull it out of your hands. And I'm telling you, if you've got a really heavy board like oak or maple, it's going to happen. Believe me. This is a 5 feet long piece of poplar, and it's about 5.5 inches wide. So it's not the heaviest beast in the world, but it's quite long. And as I'm moving it through a cut and I'm trying to keep it stable, we're going to demonstrate that. No problem at this point. I can actually control that pretty well with one hand. If I was using my, if this was the actual cut, the blade would be about right here. And don't panic, folks, we're unplugged. The blade is raised high for illustrative purposes. So as we're pushing this guy forward like that, again, no problem, no problem. I'm going to reach a point there about right there where, wow, that thing just all of a sudden got extremely heavy. and wants to be pulled down to the floor. Now, if you find yourself in that situation and you're actually doing a rip cut, you're going to find that if you're wobbling that board around, you might pinch the saw blade in the saw kerf, and you might experience what's called kickback. That's where that board gets lifted up by the blade as it's pinched, and it shoots it right back towards you and smacks you right in your little brothers down here. And if that happens, you're going to be rolling around on the floor in agony, and you're going to be singing falsetto in the choir. So we want to avoid that. We want you to be safe, because I've been there, done that. Don't do that. So let's see how we can avoid it. So we're going to set up a simulated rip cut. You can see here a couple of safety features I've got. I've got a feather board. This is going to allow my workpiece to be held tightly against the rip fence. We've got a nice strong rip fence. It's tightened down. It's not going to move, no deflection. And finally, an essential piece of kit if you're going to be doing ripping is a push block or a push board, whatever you want to call it. This is about a 5/8 piece of MDF. You can see here we've got a little heel that grabs the end of your workpiece and helps you push it through the cut. We're going to demo both of these. So again, I'm going to enter the cut. So at this point I've reached over, I've turned the saw on. I've got my stock firmly against the rip fence. The feather board's helping me there, and I've got it supported by my right hand here in the back, and my left hand is helping me push it in toward the rip fence. So I'm well supported at this point. So I'm moving it through the cut. There we go. No problem so far. Now look, as I exit the back of the table saw, that thing just glides right onto the back of that, or to the front of that off feed table. And I've got a little round over on there that I've cut that in case there was a little hang up, it should pop right up over the round over. So again, pretty safe way to do it. I'm going to finish the cut. There's the tipping point going by. Absolutely no tip, as you can see. I'm putting my other safety guy into play here, the push block, and you can see I've got a nice long edge on it here. It allows me to put downward pressure on this guy on the board, keeps it centered on the table so it doesn't want to pull up, and then the heel grabs back here, and I can keep my other hand perfectly free of the cut, and I can slide it right through there like that. Turn the saw off, and you've just done a very safe and clean rip cut. So that's the outfeed table support. We've come in for a safe landing through what can be a kind of scary cut if you haven't done a lot of those. And that's going to be it for this episode. So I told you at the beginning we were going to be coming in hot to fasten your seat belts. Well, you know what? You can unfasten your seat belts now. We've probably lost your luggage. Sorry about that. But we're going to make it up to you. And we're going to tell you, we're going to give you a wrap, up of our 5-part series. And I'll see you in just a second for that. Hey Woodworkers, welcome back. Wow, I cannot believe that we're at the end of our 5-part Jig-a-palooza series where we were getting jiggy with it, and we showed you 5 very useful jigs for the table saw. And the first jig we showed you was the crosscut sled, where we demonstrated how you could cut a perfect 90-degree angle on your workpiece. We also showed you how to do repeat cuts with that, and we showed you how to extend that to cut really long work pieces, to do repeat cuts in longer work pieces. That's a foundational jig in my shop. It's rarely off my table saw, my pacemaker. Without it, I'd be dead. Second jig we looked at was our Mighty Miter cutoff sled. And that was a very ugly jig that we had cobbled together from a bunch of parts in the offcut bin. But you know what? It did a fantastic job at cutting a beautiful 45-degree miter across the face of our workpiece. We proved that you didn't have to be good looking to work well, and that's exactly what my wife says about me. Third jig we looked at was our 45-degree beveling jig. And I had a bevel of a time, corny joke, bevel of a time getting that jig deck at 45 degrees. But you know what? Once I did, I was able to cut a perfect 45-degree bevel on the end and the side of a workpiece, and that's going to come in very handy because I'm going to be making some boxes in the future, and we're going to be using that jig extensively. The fourth jig we looked at was our L fence. We rode the L. We showed you how to joint the edge of a board safely using just the L fence and another little fence called a rub fence, and you got a perfect jointed edge off of the L fence. The coolest thing about the L fence was it allowed us to cut out very bizarre shapes with no 90-degree angles, and did that safely with only straight cuts using the rip fence and the L fence. So quite a jig there that you'll get a lot of use out of. I certainly intend to use that quite a bit in the future. And our fifth jig in the Jig-a-palooza, of course, was our safe landing, how we added outfeed support to the end of our table saw or any power tool that you have. So that's it. We're wrapping this one up. Please drop us a line, add some comments, let us know what you thought. Did you like our jigs? Tell us about your jigs. You know what? Like us, subscribe to us, all that jazz. So in our next episode, we're going to revisit the worst woodworking tool mistake I ever made, and that was the table saw that I bought because it was a cool green color. So I'm going to show you the best way how not to buy a table saw. You won't want to miss that. It's going to be a lot of fun. Anyway, that's it. I want to say until we see you back here again at the Saws and Jaws workshop, keep on making some sawdust.